For a little bit of context, this story took place when I was 19 years old. I am currently 28 and no longer live in the state where this occurrence took place. When I was 19, I worked at a gas station convenience store that was only a few minutes away from my house. I was enrolled in community college, so most of my shifts were evening or overnights. For the most part, the job was normal and boring. We didn't really get many customers during the later hours, and if we did, they usually pumped their gas, paid with a credit card, and were on their way. I decided to pick up some extra hours during our holiday break from school. I figured I could use the extra cash to get Christmas presents for my family. I was scheduled to work 3 overnight shifts in a row, which was a pain because I always found it difficult to fall asleep when I got home in the morning. The first night of my overnight stretch was going by pretty uneventfully. I was biding my time by restocking the shelves and facing the products that had gaps in them. I remember I was bringing out a big box of cosmic brownies to fill our display case when I heard the bell ring and someone enter the store. It was around 2 or 3 a.m., so I dropped what I was doing and headed behind the register to assist the person. I hadn't seen them yet, but yelled out "good evening" to see if I would get a response. I didn't hear anything, so I proceeded to move behind the register to see if the person needed assistance. When I got a glimpse of the person, it looked to be an elderly woman with dark black hair. Her face was covered in wrinkles, but it was hard to really make out anything else as she was bundled up pretty tight due to the cold weather. I saw her moving slowly throughout the aisles, not seemingly looking for anything but just walking throughout the store. After several minutes of watching her do this, I decided to ask if there was anything I could assist her with. She didn't even bother to look at me or acknowledge that she heard me. She just continued to pace throughout the store. After another 5 minutes or so, she suddenly stopped and stared at the clock that was above the cooler, turned around and scampered out the door and disappeared into the night. To be honest, I didn't really think much of it. I assumed she was homeless and was possibly just trying to get some relief from the cold. We weren't technically supposed to let people loiter in or around the store, but this occurrence seemed pretty harmless to me. The next night, I was sitting behind the counter getting pretty drowsy, wishing the sun would come up so that I could go home and try to get some rest. I was watching a TV show on my iPad around, I think, 4 a.m. when I heard the bell ring. I'm pretty sure I jumped out of my chair as I was not paying attention and dozing in and out of sleep. Startled and trying to regain my composure, I looked at the door to see who had entered, and it was the same woman from the night before. She looked almost exactly the same, except now there seemed to be several scrapes or scratches on her face. I greeted her and asked if there was anything I could help her with. Again, no response, and she began the process of walking up and down the aisles with her head down. I figured I was going to have to wait a minute or two and then let her know that if she wasn't planning on buying anything, then she would have to leave the store. Once a few minutes passed and I informed her, she stopped directly where she was standing, stared at me and said, "The only thing worth bargaining for is your soul." Her voice was high and shrill and not at all what I expected. I responded by saying, "Excuse me?" And she didn't say anything else. She just stared at me with a menacing, almost aggressive look. After about 30 seconds, she exited the store and I watched her walk across the parking lot, hoping she wouldn't come back. The final night of my consecutive overnights came all too quickly, and all I could think about was hoping that this crazy woman wouldn't show up again tonight. I never really had anxiety related to this job, so for the first time I was uneasy about heading into work. I couldn't really focus on anything during my shift other than staring at the door and waiting for customers to enter. I didn't really leave the register even though I probably could have done some stalking throughout the store. The clock seemed to be moving so slow. It was only 3 a.m. and I felt like I had been there for 12 hours. Shortly after 3 a.m., I heard the bell ring, and there she was, the same woman from the 2 previous nights. She looked even more disheveled, and the cuts on her face had increased and were also noticeable on her hands. Her hands almost seemed red, like they were smeared with blood. I looked over to her and yelled out, "Are you okay? Can I get you some help?" Meanwhile, really only concerned with my own safety. She looked up in my direction and mouthed the words, "Help me." and looked like she started to cry. I told her to hold on and went down to my purse to grab my cell phone to contact someone. I found my cell phone and was getting ready to dial 911, but then I heard the bell go and the door open, and when I looked up, she was gone. I didn't even see her scurry across the parking lot. It was that quick. I decided to call my boss, not knowing what else to do. I had clearly woke him up, but he seemed attentive when I explained what transpired during the previous 3 nights. He decided to come in and talk to me and check the property to see if we could locate her. When he arrived, he decided to go to the back and check the video recordings to see if he could get a visual or description on the person in case we decided to contact the authorities that someone had entered our store, clearly in trouble and not in the right mental state. He came back up front about 10 minutes later and had a scowl on his face. "Hand me the phone, I'm calling the cops," he said in a very serious tone. "What?" I asked, startled, slightly worried that she might be back. "Come look at this," he said, leading me back to the surveillance room. He proceeded to rewind the footage that was overlooking the back of the building, near the bathrooms. Upon playing it, I watched as the old woman walked onto screen, facing directly towards the store. Seemingly out of nowhere, her slow demeanor became explosive as she began aggressively thrusting her shoulders into the bricks of the building, falling to her knees and intermittently scratching at her face and the store. She proceeded in this psychotic state for nearly 2 minutes straight before she wandered off screen towards the front of the store and entering towards me. The timing lined up directly with when I remembered seeing her. I was in mild shock, with my hand over my mouth as my boss informed me about experiences he's had with various junkies in the past, explaining that some of them seemed borderline possessed without rhyme or reason for their actions. We ended up reporting the incidents and showing the footage to a few patrolmen, but there wasn't much they could do besides reassuring us that they'd keep an officer patrolling the area for the next couple evenings. The way that woman moved still baffles my mind, based on the difference when I saw her demeanor when she walked in. Looking back, her asking for help really made me wish there was something I could have done for her. But needless to say, I haven't worked night shift for quite some time.
My cousin came over for Halloween that year just to go trick-or-treating. I was 15 at the time, and I know that's a bit old for trick-or-treating, but hey, it's free candy. My cousin was also 15, and we were planning on taking it easy that Halloween and just hitting enough houses to make a reasonable haul before we went home. My friend and his younger brother went with us, but we eventually went our separate ways. It was pretty busy, and there was a whole lot of kids at every house with decorations up. My cousin Jack and I decided to hit some of the houses with lights on with no kids already on the front stoops. Lots of houses that we had already hit before that had no decorations up and had lights on all had people inside ready to deliver candy to trick-or-treaters. But all the other kids I know for a fact target the heavily decorated houses. We ended up getting through like 4 houses in a minute because of no lineups. The next house in the line was not decorated at all, but there was a light on, so we thought we'd give it a shot. We knocked on the door, and immediately an older man opened the door. He opened it completely, which revealed 5 other guys just standing there. They were much younger than the older man who opened the door. I'm guessing they were in their late 30s, while the older man who opened the door was in his early 50s. He held out a bowl of candy, then reached in and grabbed some and put it in each of our bags. The older man asked Jack what his name was, and Jack responded to his question using a fake name. Jack said bye before the older man could say anything else. We walked off the front stoop, and alarms immediately started going off in my head. Jack seemed alarmed as well, and we started talking about how sketchy that was. Why were there 6 guys right there when we opened the door? Why were they all acting so strange? Those were the questions that were floating around in my head. Jack and I were a little spooked because of how weird that was. We went to 2 more houses, then we started walking to my house. Jack and I glanced back at that house to see a car pulling out of the driveway. The car drove up the way we were walking and started slowing down right next to us. The roads were clear, and all the trick-or-treaters were on the sidewalks, so there should have been no reason the car slowed down right next to us. We picked up the pace a bit, and that's when another car sped up behind them, eventually beginning to go the same pace as the first car. I recognized the guy driving the first car, and the guy driving the second car. The guy driving the first car was the older guy who gave us the candy, and the driver in the second car was one of the 5 guys just standing there suspiciously. There was also somebody in the passenger seat in the first car, but all I could see was the silhouette of the person. When Jack and I were 2 houses away from my house, we saw the first car park right across the street from my house. We didn't even see where the second car went. We just bolted back inside my house. Our parents, who were sitting in the living room talking, asked us what was wrong. We told them the whole story, and when we were finished, we went to the window to check if that car was still parked across the street, and it was. But then 5 seconds after I checked, it drove off. It had probably been parked there for the 5 minutes since we went inside my house. My mom and Jack's mom wanted Jack and I to go show our dads the house where all those guys were in. But eventually, our parents calmed us down and told us it was just a Halloween gag or something. Though I have my own theory on what was going on. The reason why there were 6 guys in the main doorway was because when a lone trick-or-treater or group of trick-or-treaters much younger than Jack and I came to the door, they were looking to jump or snatch them. But when they saw that Jack and I were teenagers and literally the same height as them, they decided to play it cool, even though they still looked sketchy. And why they were following us in their cars, we will never know. But when the night ended and everyone was off to bed, I realized that house is only 1 block from my house.